all-encompassing, actions within the United States or within U.S. military and diplomatic circles were deemed just as important to American foreign policy as those directly involving foreign governments. Accordingly, the magazine carefully followed cases ranging from the fight to abolish the House Committee on Un-American Activities to the case of Major General Edwin A. Walker. Walker was an Army general serving in Germany in early 1961 when he was removed from his command of the 24th Infantry Division and accused of advocating the beliefs of the conspiracy-oriented John Birch Society among his troops. On June 12th, he was officially admonished by the Commander-in-Chief of the U.S. Army in Europe. Walker then resigned his commission in protest, becoming a spokesman about the dangers of communist insurgency. The accusations against Walker rested upon the reporting of a notoriously scandalous private tabloid called the Overseas Weekly and were seriously flawed. Walker had likely overstepped his bounds in using the Americans for Constitutional Action voter index to advise his troops on how to cast their votes. He might well have accused public figures including Harry Truman and Eleanor Roosevelt of being definitely pink in a speech to U.S. troops and their wives, although the only newspaper to report on such a speech was the Overseas Weekly. And he did include John Birch Society founder Robert Welch's book, The Life of John Birch, on a list of recommended reading, leading to accusations of links between Walker's anti-communist education programs and Welch's conspiratorial views. Even so, historians have concluded that Walker was unfairly demonized for his actions, and National Review leapt upon the charges with righteous indignation. The magazine slayed the New York Times and the Washington Post for what they managed not to discover in their investigation of the case, again in National Review's opinion. First, the book The Life of John Birch was published years before the founding of the society itself and told the story of a young American Army captain murdered by Chinese communists at the end of World War II, what the magazine viewed as a pertinent subject for troops stationed to fight against communists themselves. And it was only one of a number of relevant publications recommended by Walker. Second, Overseas Weekly alleged that Walker had titled an anti-communist training program Pro-Blue because of a connection to the John Birch Society's guidebook, which was called the Blue Book. And in fact, Pro-Blue referred to nothing more scandalous than the reality that on tactical military maps, red was the enemy force and blue was the friendly force, so it was pro-American basically. Finally, Walker denied that he had made derogatory comments about Truman and Mrs. Roosevelt. So the magazine argues that it is a decorated World War II vet against a notoriously conservative newspaper. And after Walker's resignation, numerous stories would crop up about other of his activities with regards to the civil rights movement and so on, but this did not come out at this time. On June 24th, National Review also reported that the West German government had taken on General Walker's case against Overseas Weekly. A bit of information seeming to corroborate Walker's positions that most American media did not report. Walker's case was part of a larger problem within the military, a problem of lack of resolution that mirrored the lack of will National Review saw in Kennedy's conduct of the Bay of Pigs invasion. In early August, as the Walker case progressed, National Review opined that General Walker was carved up just for practice, just to get the knives well sharpened. Week after week, the Kennedy administration and its supporters took measures National Review deemed questionable at best and self-defeating at worst. Now, meanwhile, the magazine directed a continual stream of ridicule toward policies that authors within the publication derided as unfocused and offering something for nothing. Nice ideas that would never hold true in reality. January 28th, National Review's This Week section sardonically included a list of the agencies proposed during the first week of the new congressional session. And I won't read through the whole list, but it's very, very long and goes from National Peace Agency, Peace Corps, Department of Urban Affairs, all the way to Committee on Independent Unions, Center for Cultural and Technical Interchange between East and West, Federal Recreation Service, Commission on Noxious and Obscene Matter and Materials, American Joint Commission to assist in the unification of Ireland. So they're really lampooning the idea of all these federal programs being proposed. Beyond the bemusement, however, National Review was sincerely concerned. At the beginning of March, a bulletin observed that the staff was still waiting to hear of the sacrifices that Kennedy's inaugural speech said Americans must face, and facing the stern challenge of our grim era. These sacrifices, it seemed, were not to come from Social Security. Those stipends were scheduled to increase. The poor and those living in depressed areas would not be called upon. Washington was sending new funds, food, grants, and loans their way. Soldiers would be kept in home-like comfort, and new millions were scheduled for education. And yet, for all the appearances, the editorialist wrote, there will surely be sacrifices too before it is over. The government that is to dispense so generously, producing nothing of itself, can give with its one hand only what it takes with the other. Less indeed, for there is a charge for the transfer. In the end, the same citizens would both receive and pay. From elderly citizens finding that even larger Social Security checks would not keep up with inflation, to teachers whose pay raises would be swallowed, and then some, by increases in insurance rates and drops in purchasing power. In the end, all Americans would pay, and not just in financial terms. By so much as our day-to-day affairs are further absorbed into the tentacles of Leviathan, from that much has the range of our free choice been narrowed. At the same time, National Review and its readership remained divided regarding what positive programs conservatives should promote in place of this dangerous federal growth. So moving beyond negative commentary to the positive alternative, a lot of confusion continued to exist. A post-election interview with Arizona Senator and conservative icon Barry Goldwater pinpointed an almost universal concern. One of the weaknesses of the conservative performance, Goldwater told senior editor L. Brent Bozell, has been too much verbal criticism and too little conservative action or proposals for action. The devil in the detail, however, was what sort of action. Scholar Wilmore Kendall, reporting on Goldwater's newly published Statement of Proposed Republican Principles, Programs, and Objectives, argued that this publication, by focusing on strategy rather than the fundamental principles that comprise Goldwater's paradigmatic book, Conscience of a Conservative, Goldwater ran a serious risk of treating symptoms rather than problems, accepting the foundations of the welfare state in a rush to move into positions of greater political influence. Letters to the editor revealed that while Kendall's ideas held water with some, others questioned his insistence on broking no compromise. Some writers argued that this was what political action groups were for, was to press principle, that politicians themselves needed to work and compromise well in office. Principle versus pragmatism was a recurring theme throughout the period under consideration. As of August 1961, National Review had reached no firm conclusion. In the midst of the Leviathan, however, a new force was beginning to grow. National Review devoted considerable space to chronicling the development of a burgeoning conservative youth movement in the United States. This was a development the editorial staff viewed with almost parental pride, and well it might. Editor William F. Buckley, himself a young man of 35, was a founder or key organizer of myriad youth organizations springing up in the 1950s and 1960s, from the educationally focused Intercollegiate Society of Individualists, founded in 1953, to the more politically activist Young Americans for Freedom, which was founded in 1950. Accordingly, Buckley himself penned a signed column on one of the more lofty displays of conservative youth prowess in early 1961, the first annual award ceremony of the Young Americans for Freedom, held March 3, 1961 in Manhattan Center before an overflow crowd from which over 5,000 were turned away. 11 awards were granted in areas ranging from education to international affairs. That one went to the Republic of China, Taiwan. Arizona Senator Barry Goldwater delivered the keynote address, telling a roaring crowd that the country was being caught up in a wave of conservatism that could easily become the political phenomenon of our time. Buckley told of a friend's curious reaction to the festivities. He burst into peals of laughter at the sheer impudence of it all. And Buckley reflected with considerable mirth, this did indeed represent an amusing turn of events. Here we are, well into the last half of the century, the overwhelming majority of our professors Stakhanovite in the cause of liberalism. 3 decades of intensive indoctrination in state welfarism, anti-communism, moral libertinage, skepticism, anti-Americanism. And here was foregathered at the Manhattan Center in New York City, possibly the largest student assembly of the year, certainly the most enthusiastic, to pay tribute one after the other to the most conspicuous symbols of everything they have been studiously taught by the intelligentsia to look down upon with contempt. It was as though the student body of the Lenin Institute took time off in the middle of the semester to pay tribute to the memory of the Tsar. As Buckley lauded the students for their efforts, however, he also noted the guiding role of experienced conservative activist Martin Liebman in organizing the logistics of the evening. Lehman's presence revealed something significant about the conservative youth movement. Here were young people working cooperatively with their elders to forge an integrated, multi-generational movement for change. This would differ markedly from some of the activity on the left yet to come in the course of the 1960s, and might well demonstrate just why the conservative movement has enjoyed lasting success. While college-age conservatives rallied, National Review cheered on a new crop of Republican House members elected in 1960. On balance, the magazine reported, the new Congress was actually more conservative than the last, even with the triumph of a Democrat in the executive office. As an advertisement for a National Review forum reported,